Okay, it's 3:01. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the second seminar of the Healthy Poor Symposium, which, I said in the last seminar, I hope to be the first of potentially many Healthy Poor Symposiums. This is a virtual event where we talk about mental health and talk about mental health within the hospitality industry from the standpoint of organizational structures, cultural systems that we subscribe to. So not necessarily just talking about, substance use, depression, and everything. Like those are all worthy conversations. But these are seminars around actionable behavioral pieces that we can change as our industry kind of goes through this little bit of crisis. This little crisis that we're experiencing. So a few things. My name is Louise Green. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a hospitality beverage professional. I work for Winebow here in the Midwest as a spirit specialist. So in tandem with being a licensed professional counselor and teaching about mental health within the hospitality industry, I don't know which one is my side gig, honestly, because I spend a lot of time doing both, but I'm also a spirits educator as the spirit specialist for Winebow. So this conversation in particular is something that I'm especially passionate about. It's something that I've been kicking around in my dome for like a hot minute of how drinks education and how we educate, who the educators are, contributes to, different behavioral problems or mental health issues that we might encounter within the hospitality industry. Even though I'm a therapist, this is not therapy. This is a discussion. Elements of it might be psychoeducational. But if you look in the chat, there are a bunch of resources posted for individuals who are in the UK, in the United States, and in Canada who are tuning into this. I think that we're all pretty in this, well, all the panelists throughout the day are really responsible in terms of how we communicate things, but, you might feel some stuff. You might feel things like guilt or sadness or regret, or you might recognize some of the things that we're talking about. And if those feelings start to become overwhelming, you're welcome to dip out and use any of those resources or take a walk or rely on any of the adaptive coping mechanisms that you yourself employ. But yeah, for all y'all at home, take notes if you want. Write down ideas. Super, 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 super excited to have you all. So I guess I'll have you all introduce yourselves. Let's start with Miranda.
Everyone, I'm Miranda Elliott. My pronouns are she, her, and I am from Chicago. I about a month ago launched a wine school that's virtual during the pandemic. I just want to do classes that are inclusive, that are fun. I know I've sat on a lot of Zoom classes that just kind of like endlessly drag on. I try to kind of be engaging. I also started in the restaurant industry. I was at Moto Restaurant, Le Nomad, a few other places here in Chicago, and then moved over to the sales side doing education and sales management, things like that.
Sweet. Welcome. Francisco.
Yeah, my name is Francisco Terrazas. I'm originally from Arizona. I now live just across the river from New York City. I am the national agave educator for Samson Surrey. So for those that don't know, it's a really small craft portfolio of 6 brands: Blue Coat Gin, few spirits from Illinois, just up the road from you, Laura, Bren, which is a French single malt whiskey, Widow Jane whiskey, Mezcal Vago, which is kind of where my background is. And then as of earlier this year, or I guess late last year, Tequila Ocho as well. So I'm very lucky in that I get to specialize in our agave spirits. That's kind of where my background and history is. I've worked for Vago specifically since 2015. Before that, I ran a really extensive, one of kind of the pioneering, I think, Mezcal programs in the country at the Pastry War in Houston, Texas, working for Bobby Hugel. And then before that, I really got my start bartending in Austin, Texas, right when that kind of craft scene was just starting to get off the ground. But I've really been focused specifically on Mexican distillates for about the last probably 7 to 8 years of my career. Also was kind of one of the founding partners of Para Nubes Oaxacan Rum, which is now kind of its own project. I really focus on the agave spirits now, but have hopefully a pretty extensive history traveling through Mexico, working with distillates from different regions, different raw materials, etc.
Great, thank you. Kelvin.
What's good, y'all? My name is Kelvin Uffre, he, him. I'm originally from Dominican Republic, but I grew up in the Bronx. So if anybody is here from the BX, shout out to y'all, much love. I sell liquor for Winebow, you know what I'm saying? They call me a specialist, but I just sling hooch, you know, make numbers, sell shit. I'm also a co-founder of IBC, which is an Ideal Bartender Collective. And this is a platform that offers BIPOC-centered beverage education. So not necessarily centering the colonizer narrative, but trying to focus on the indigenous, Afro-Indigenous, and Black contributions to our spirits industry. That's about it, yo, yeah.
Cool. So I'm so excited to get this conversation started that I almost don't know where to begin. So there's a lot there's a lot of issues that I observe and have experienced around drinks education. And you know, what I think what got me on this subject first was the issue of consumption and how drinks education and consumption are it's a very, very muddy water. And the longer I engaged in drinks education and started teaching around drinks education, I started seeing, you know, problematic narratives with, you know, a colonizer mentality or misrepresentation, or, you know, confusing marketing with education. You know, brand education is actually marketing as opposed to, you know, like education. So Francisco, I'm gonna let you tee this off of like your experience in the agave sphere, speaking to agave, what it is, your experience with Vago in particular, which, you know, Mezcal Vago was a very instrumental project to my personal spirits development and drinks development. Yeah, what have you seen over the years? How has education changed, and how has your approach to education changed or been influenced by, you know, some of those pieces that I just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, my own experience was very much, I mean, my own experience with the relationship that I have to the brands that I represent, to the way that I approach education, I think is somewhat unique to me personally, just because of the area that I'm from, my own cultural heritage, my disconnection growing up from that cultural heritage, and then this being a vehicle for kind of rediscovery and reconnection with that. So that part of it is kind of hard to, I think, generalize for most people, or for a lot of people to relate to. Maybe not necessarily, but you know, that's always where I come from, and that's kind of how I find my own particular unique voice, which is, I think, one of the most important things is for everybody to find their own voice, right? And I know that's something that's really said a lot, but it's not oftentimes done very easily. But I've spent an extraordinary amount of time just kind of thinking what my role is and how I'm coming into this world, agave, you know, in this case being agave spirits, and you know, how my own personal connections with the producer, what those have meant to me, and how I can kind of use those relationships to shape my tone and my narrative with consumers, right? And I think I'm very fortunate in the brand that I work for, because I think the brand that I work for has given me a much more direct connection with the people on the ground, with the culture, with the land, than I think most people have the benefit of who have my role. Well, first off, there aren't a lot of people who have my role, right? Kind of a national voice for a particular Mezcal brand. I know that as the category has grown, obviously brands have needed to get more boots on the ground very quickly. And I think that's resulted in a very regional approach to brand representation. And that's great. And it makes sense, because a lot of these brands don't necessarily have a lot of money coming out of the gate. And usually when you're doing kind of regional, you know, hiring regional voices, it's usually in a part-time setting, which means they can usually supplement their income through taking on bar shifts and stuff like that, right? Judah and Dylan, very much to their credit, were very deliberate in the fact that they wanted to support me in the way that I didn't need to look for side income, which allowed them to kind of focus my attention on Vago, which meant that I spent about a month and a half right out the gate before I ever went into the market or anything like that, learning the process, living with Aquilino, living with Torres. And, you know, that is something that I can never, ever thank them enough for, because I think that gave me a much more authentic voice. And I think that's one of the things that I really look for when I look at the people who I kind of consider in my cohort, if you will, you know, the people who have roles or adjacent roles or similar roles to what I do. I obviously don't expect people to be able to spend as much time as I have on the ground with the producers. I think that's a lot to ask of a brand, to invest that much time and that much money in their employees. I endorse that approach. I think every brand should, or find a way to do that if they can. Obviously, that's not necessarily the most realistic thing, but I think it's really important for the people who take on these roles to try and find the deeper connection for themselves and how to explore that connection. I guess ultimately is what's really important, is for them to find a part of the culture or a part of the place where these spirits come from, you know, regardless of if it's agave spirits, cane spirits from certain parts of the world, what have you. But whatever culture you're choosing to take on the role of representing, you have to find a way to make your voice authentic and knowledgeable about those cultures and about those places, and not just take on the role because you want brand work or because you love Mezcal as a spirit. You know, you have to find some deeper level meaning. And I think the more that people take that approach and really look for more intrinsic connections to the brands that they're representing, I think it'll really kind of lift the level of discourse across the board.
So you said a lot. You said a lot there that was just like kind of firing things in my head. And I think my biggest takeaway from everything that you just said is that there's a massive responsibility that comes with being an educator for a brand, for a spirit, especially a spirit like you know, agave spirits like Mezcal that are so often, like, you know, stories from producers are erased or exacerbated or you know, people exploited and stuff. So having a responsibility, having, you know, an authentic approach to how we educate, instead of, you know, sort of just reciting talking points, if you will.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know, and I think there's also something that I would like the entire panel to kind of address. There's, as an educator of, let's say, history or humanities or spirits or, you know, any sort of like cultural realm that we embark on educating, the educator is essentially a prism, right? And the educator is, it's going to essentially be through the educator's eyes. So there's a responsibility of the spirits or the drinks educator to put themselves in a position where they're not inserting their personal narrative or essentially potentially oppressive narrative into that educational piece. Miranda, you and I talked a lot about like, you know, wine regions in California and erasing the people who came before all of those vines were planted, you know, and how that's often profoundly overlooked in wine education. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think it's like a history that a lot of us don't know, myself included. And it's really hard to find information on it. I found one article that was like, the California wine industry was built on, you know, slave labor of, you know, indigenous people. And it just kind of like, I don't know. It's not something that is included in our education as a whole. We don't really talk about how and who set up our vineyards. We don't talk about who set up our wineries. You know, was there exploitation? You know, I think South Africa is starting to address some of those exploitative, you know, slave labor or apartheid, things like that in South Africa. But in the US, I don't think that we really talk about it that much, partially because it's like, oh, well, prohibition happened and everything kind of, you know, went away. So we're fine. But, you know, I think that, you know, I think it's really important for us to kind of recognize like who established it and who is exploited in doing so. And if we're not really, if we're only telling, like I was reading a book about Napa, and it was describing Napa as, wild and untamed land before, the settlers came. And it was like, well, I mean, there were people there for thousands of years before. So.
Yeah, like as if, I mean, that erasure I think is profoundly problematic. And I'm gonna move it over to Kelvin a little bit to talk about ownership of spirits, import, what that looks like. Kelvin, you and I have had a lot of conversations around rum in particular, and the colonization of rum, and I'm just gonna let you take over and speak your words.
Yeah, look, I think it's really beautiful to hear Francisco talk about sort of being out of touch with his cultural roots and then finding a pathway back in working with Vago and Mezcal, like really getting a chance to rediscover some of the indigenous culture that's part of his heritage. And when you have that type of cultural background, the intellectualization of a product or a commodity looks and feels quite different. When you don't, and speaking to his point about regionality within brands having to just hire somebody, most of the times those people are white. Our industry is an incredibly white, male-dominated place. I'm not gonna beat a dead horse. Shout out to my white boys that are watching right now. I still fuck with y'all. I'm not trying to demonize y'all, but y'all been holding out these roles for way too long. And y'all, some of y'all done a good job, and some of y'all just suck and get a place because you mirror the people who have held power for so long. So when you have brands and spirits being spoken about for so long through this lens of, and forget colonizer, discoverer, like untamed lands in Napa, and we tamed it, and we discovered distillation, negating all of the slave labor, indigenous labor, wars that were fought, intricate intimacies of that history. You're forced to intellectualize it. And by intellectualize it, you fucking put mezcal in a wine glass, you swirl that shit around, which is the stupidest shit anybody could do, and you sniff that shit, and you're like, I get notes of grass, and it's like, bro, shut the fuck up. Like that, like intellectualizing, anglicizing, and samsplaining mezcal, you're taking two completely separate things and trying to put it into a context that is, once again, a white narrative. So with people owning their own cultural narrative and taking power within these spirits, roles that are, in essence, culturally theirs, and also the perspective of how women experience things, because it isn't just about Black and brown and indigenous people. Women have been often left out of this conversation, and we all know women have much more heightened senses than men do. They have much more heightened senses. It's a fact of nature. They give birth, we don't. They're meant to keep something alive. We're not necessarily, that's not what we're equipped for. So the heightened senses of women have also been left out. The ways that women experience spirits have been left out. So I'm just like, the more that we can bring this back, the less we're gonna be samsplaining shit, the less we're gonna be swirling clarin in a fucking wine glass, talking like we know what's going on in that glass.
You brought up something about, the patterns of hiring white men to represent mezcal, right? And again, like, it's a lot of dudes that represent, white dudes that represent mezcal who, like you said, I would also fucks with. I mean, you see, you said it. But I want to talk a little bit about the impact of representation as well. When we are looking at spirits that have like history around, sacred history that we are then commoditizing, that we are intellectualizing, like you said, Kelvin, and what is the impact within our industry and the expression of our industry and the equity and diversity within our industry when you have this sacred spirit that is then being consistently shot or mixed or utilized in ways that are maybe against what it was originally intended for the sake of money. Like what is the impact of the individual who's sitting there in that training?
I mean, Miranda, do you have an idea for that right there? Any thoughts on that?
In terms of like, I mean, so I obviously come from like a wine space, but you know, I think like, I don't know, we take this thing that like, you know, in a lot of places it's what you drink with your meal, or you drink with your family, or you drink for a religious ceremony, and then we make it into this like highly, and I'm probably one of the most like guilty of this, you know, going through sommelier certification and all of that. Like we take it and we make it like a grid, and you know, instead of an experience and a, you know, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know that I have like a full thought, but yeah.
no doubt, no doubt. But I think one of the things that happens is that it's just highly limiting. Like if you've never fucking tasted currants, like currants don't grow in the Bronx. Like they call it a food desert. It's not a food desert necessarily, but there are just different things that grow and that happen in places of low socioeconomic status or materially disadvantaged places. So I don't know what the fuck a currant tastes like or smells like. Really, now I do, because I worked in Michelin restaurants and I've been fired from some of the best James Beard award-winning places in New York. Fired. But for real. But you know, now I can say I have that Rolodex. But for our young professionals coming up who maybe don't have access to those things, those flavors, those spaces, because those are some real gatekeeping places. Be able to go somewhere and smell fresh anise and green peppercorns and shit. So it's very limiting, and it also creates a gap of understanding, because you go, man, if I don't know what that tastes like, if the framework is black currants and all this stuff, you don't have access to that flavor profile here, but you grew up smelling tamarindo and parcha and, you know, tropical rain and shit, and that's not in the flavor wheel. How do you make a connection to these things that's truly yours? You won't. You just will perform whatever the fucking dude is trying, or woman is trying to tell you it should be. And I think that's stifling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, yeah, that's just, I don't think that's fair.
So you mentioned gatekeeping, you know, and there is a lot of gatekeeping in drinks education in particular, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's often very, very expensive. And often, you know, Miranda, I'm certain, having going through the Court of Master Sommeliers, like you have
No gatekeeping there.
No gatekeeping there at all. But even we see that in spirits. Like I remember talking with someone. There was a bar opening here in Chicago, and you know, someone had sort of emerged as a really talented beverage person, you know, with cocktails and mixing spirits and flavors, and it was a really cool approach. And this person I was talking to about it was like, well, who have they been mentored by? Have they done Bar Smarts? Have they done the CAP program? Have they done this? Now, mind you, like I did the Bar 5-day. I'm on the Tails committee. I am a part of these structures, you know, so I'm not gonna like pretend that I'm not. But to use those opportunities for education and networking, right, as a gatekeeping device of somebody isn't able to express themselves through their creation, through their work, through, you know, how they understand flavor and how they communicate and share that understanding, is incredibly problematic. Because then if you don't subscribe to that thinking that is, you know, set by those certain individuals, you know, does that mean that you can't excel in this work, that you can't share, you know? So I don't know, I want to talk a little bit about how we can dismantle those gatekeeping pieces, how we can make education more accessible, and more, I don't even want to call it inclusive. I want to call it equitable. Like I want to make education, you know, educational resources from all kinds of people and places, and, you know, not saying like we're going to take this white male dominated structure of learning and bring, you know, non-white people in. You know, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how do we make it actually more equitable. Thoughts? No. I'm like, how do we break it down?
Thoughts on our end of it, but I think our structure, our knowledge base is is kind of a community good, and I think that's how you see it transmitted to a large extent. The and it kind of works both ways, but in the community around agave spirits, people are very enthusiastic about sharing wine, or about sharing knowledge, about acquiring information, sharing information. A lot of it is from a very kind of empirical academic elite perspective to a certain extent, which is very disconnected from the kind of anecdotal and cultural knowledge that and generational knowledge that exists on the ground. But a lot of it is being shared, honestly, through social media channels. Honestly, I mean, I think that's really changing the way that people learn, for good and for bad. Our knowledge system, and there is no formalized, there is a offshoot formalized certification that nobody really pays attention to, because it's not regulated by anybody really, so we won't really consider that. But on the whole, our kind of knowledge, we don't have any kind of certification system that's formalized, right? That's structured. So that frees us up to share that knowledge a little bit more easily. And I think that fosters a better sense of community on the consumer end of things. On the producer, at the producer level, it takes a lot of time and experience, obviously, to learn about these products, and that is just shared through time and experience, right? And like I said earlier, going down there and then being the best representative that we can for this category, for a brand, for a family, depending on how your brand or whoever you're working for representing is structured. So, I think that allows us to share that information more readily. The bigger challenge, I think, is in some of, and this is where I'd like to hear Miranda's perspective, having worked in a more formalized structure. My wife has come up through one of the certification channels in the wine world as well, and also has her own issues with it, and kind of how tightly guarded wine knowledge is, even access to the courses, to the testing, what have you. It just seems to get more and more expensive, and the walls just continually seem to be getting higher and higher. And that's one of the things that I'm very grateful for, is that we don't have to deal with that necessarily. And then on the flip side, also, for agave spirits, it's kind of created this culture where everybody seems to be an expert to a certain extent. And I think that tends to devalue a little bit some of the people who have been kind of some of the forward, kind of the forward thinking, the leading academics in agave spirits culture. And there's been a little bit of backlash against that on their part. And it's just kind of a very interesting side effect of how easily that information is transmitted now, because I think, not completely, but to a certain extent, I understand why they're upset, having their own voices who have dedicated their entire careers somewhat delegitimized in the eyes of consumers, because that same information is now so readily available to them, right? But downloading a PDF of a peer-reviewed study and reading the abstract and reading the conclusion, as I often do, by no means makes you any kind of an expert. So I think there still is value for those actual bona fide experts in the field, but the ease of access to information is blurring that line a little bit. And I don't know what it's like as much for cane spirits. My experience in there is much more limited. And, we're essentially starting from scratch when it came to Pata Nubes, because there's 5 commercial cane brands in the US market right now from Mexico. So, that we're basically starting from scratch and learning that as we go.
And I think a lot of, making education more equitable in those pieces comes down to, humility of the teacher, and understanding that even though you are the educator, you are the teacher, you are the authority in whatever situation you're in, you still have so much to learn, and you can learn from the people who you are teaching too. Education doesn't have to be, in the last seminar, we were talking a little bit about hierarchies within the hospitality industry, and how the transmission of information comes from the top down, and creating larger systems that are where everybody has voice, feedback is welcome, psychological safety, all of those pieces. And I think education is an extension of that that just because you are the authority and you are teaching something doesn't necessarily mean that you can't learn from the people who you are teaching, or that you know everything about that subject. I think it's sort of that, that model of the more you learn, the more you really realize you don't know. Like Kelvin said, both of our titles are spirit specialist. And I definitely would say that I know more about spirits than, a 12-year-old or whatever, you know what I mean? But I can't quite say that I'm, and I have my certifications and whatever that looks like, but it doesn't, I still don't feel expert. I still don't feel like I could possibly know everything, and I know there's a lot of folks out there that think that they do. I'm like, how could you possibly?
Well, and I think, at least in the wine industry, what was being said before about like certifications and things like that, I think that there's also this like push to get a certification to be like, okay, well, I know what I'm talking about because I'm an advanced sommelier or I'm a master sommelier or whatever. Of course, the problem happens when you look at the pass rate for how many men there are, how many white men, how there are 0 Black women who are master sommeliers. Like, it's just clear from the sort of statistics, like who's getting through, who's being, gatekeepers and all of that. And of course, with like the New York Times article talking about sexual abuse, sexual harassment in the court. I mean, I was sexually harassed during an exam. So, how is that being considered as a fair candidate? I'm not actually really being considered when you get to that point, and that was an advanced sommelier exam. And I think that like we have to, I think especially with these exams, I came to the realization I was supposed to sit the master sommelier exam last week, and then it got pushed back, and then I decided like I just can't keep doing this. I can't keep giving them my money. I can't keep putting my time and effort into something where I might not even be really considered by some of these like men who don't actually view me as a true candidate. And I'm a white woman too. Like, it's even more of a barrier for entry for, BIPOC candidates, for, range of people. And, I think that, at least for me, I came to the realization, like, I can't keep throwing my money. How many thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars have I given to this organization? I need to like take a step back, see what and if they're going to do anything, and potentially not keep going for it. But I also have to recognize, like, in the wine industry, if you have a certification, that could be a way that you can get a job, or you can get more money and all of that. So it's like this weird cycle.
Because there is a networking.
Sorry,
Oh no, go ahead.
I just want to say, Miranda, I'm really sorry to hear that happened to you during a test, but I'm really sad that happened in general, just that it happened. That's really fucking shitty. And I just want to take a minute to acknowledge how demeaning and terrifying that must have felt.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I feel like it was a thing too, that it took me like 7 years to realize that it was sexual harassment. Because how many times do we work in a restaurant, in a bar, and we're just sexually harassed, and that's how it is, and we just accept it. And
yeah.
So when it was in an exam, it didn't even occur to me at first that it was sexual harassment. And then I was like, would I ever say that to someone else? No, because that would be sexual harassment. So.
Yeah. I mean, people like criticize academia and, higher education, but, a lot of, and white feminism and all these things, but a lot of really amazing vocabulary came from academia, and vocabulary that helped us identify oppressions that we wouldn't have necessarily identified without. And the point I'm trying to make is that there is a lot of good within the Court of Psalms, WSET, and these hierarchies of education. It's not one thing, and I think we need to start understanding. That's why it's so difficult to understand these things in a dynamic way. It's hurtful, but also it is also, like you said, an opportunity. More importantly, though, when we are talking about spirits within this room, we're talking about a product. This has left the, jicaras of Mexico. This is left like the denjons in the basements of Michoacan. This is now in a bottle, and it's hit some excise tax, and we're buying it on shelves, and we're selling it. So these hierarchies of education add value. When you can say you're a som and you co-sign a wine, you sell wine. When you can say, I'm a Mezcal expert. I've been to 6 of the 9 states in Mexico. I'm a Mezcal som. I'm a Mezcal som. That phrase is just fucking crazy. But yo, let me say, I'm a Mezcal sommelier. When you talk about a brand, you sell bottles. When you look at the top bartenders of Tales, the #1 bartenders in the world, mainly all white, they sell product. They open bars, and those bars generate income for all of these brands. So I think one thing to note with a great responsibility is, how are you contributing to the sales of products? Whose products are you selling, and how are you benefiting that hierarchy? Because we're all in the mix. None of us have clean paws. I got filthy ass paws. How do we go about that with great responsibility? It's tough.
I'll speak. Is that Kuko? Is he causing problems over there?
Kuko's wilding right now.
I often, speaking outside of being the moderator of this and more speaking to the dissonance that comes with that responsibility that you speak to, Kelvin. And, I'm a therapist, right? Like I was behind the bar serving alcohol while I was working with people who were experiencing substance use issues. Like there's a definite dissonance because the job is to sell. The job is to be profitable with how we sell, and I would maybe justify it by being like, well, I'm making something beautiful. I'm crafting an experience or whatever. So there is apps, and even now working for a distributor, there is a dissonance that how can I be healthy poor but also spirit specialist at the same time? And maybe this seminar is me trying to bridge and like mitigate that dissonance and that pain that comes with those differences a little bit. But what I arrive at consistently is, if I can provide education that enriches people's experiences, that represents the people who are making whatever it is that we are selling boxes of, representing them accurately, telling their story authentically and truly, welcoming people into a space maybe where they weren't before, that creates a sense of curiosity that they can keep authentically exploring. We talk about transparency all the time, but being transparent within that, those are some ways that I can look at my dirty hands and maybe clean them up just a little bit, So my question then, because, my hands are definitely dirty. My question then becomes, from an actionable standpoint, because we do have people on here who are, who represent brands, who, work as drinks educators. What are some actionable pieces that we can make education more responsible? And I also want to speak a little bit to how we teach about tasting, what the consumption looks like of, that sort of like going to a class for brand education, but you end up getting wasted with your friends throughout, that's kind of not kind of an issue. That's an issue. Like that's a problem. That's something that I've participated in many times throughout my career. That kind of makes my lower back sweat when I think about it. What really does this look like moving forward? How can we make the process of drinks education better, safer, more equitable, more authentic?
If nobody else wants to, I'm happy to jump in. I think people who are educating on behalf of brands, I think it's hard because the things that we, or at least myself and people who are kind of in similar roles of mine, at least within not even agave spirits, but Mexican spirits, but I think really anytime you're representing spirits from kind of a developing economy, really or any place that has a history of marginalization, cultural erasure, you know, a litany of different issues, I think you have to take on the responsibility of asking what your role, what is needed from your voice, and how, you know, is it my place, and what is my place in telling that particular story, right? Because then that shapes a healthier tone from you as an educator. So I think that is one of the first steps. Secondarily is learning how to instill in your buyers, your consumers, et cetera, an appreciation for those cultures, so that, you know, they are willing to take on a slightly greater sense of responsibility in their consumption behaviors and their purchasing behaviors. Because, you know, obviously working in the spirits world, it is, you know, ultimately we're selling drinks, right? And it's supposed to be all about a good time. And a lot of times people don't want to be troubled by the headier things that are involved on the front end of these spirits that they're consuming. But, you know, I don't know. I don't really necessarily buy into that part of that equation, because the people on the ground, they need us to do that level of work. They need bartenders to do the work of having that conversation, of having the finesse to be able to plant the seeds of interest in their consumers and seeds of appreciation in their consumers, so that they make better, wiser purchasing decisions, right? And then also, when you add that aspect of kind of responsibility, and when you add that aspect of sensitivity for what you're representing into your sessions, into your conversations, I think it helps mitigate the consumption issues on the back end, right? Because people are being more thoughtful about what it is that they're consuming. They're not just there to try a bunch of different spirits, etc. So when I tend to give my sessions, they usually end up being some of the drier sessions that I think, you know, whoever's sitting in that room with me have attended, you know, whether it be at Thirst or Tales or what have you. You know, we're not trying to cram as many different expressions in front of people. We're trying to put together something that's thoughtful and that's well-rounded and that has a lot of intention behind it. And I think when you bring that level of thought to it on the front end, that really helps kind of maintain the integrity throughout your educational session, or even throughout your, you know, even if you take that approach when you're putting a flight in front of a guest at the bar, taking that tone and taking that pacing and taking the time to deliberately say the important things about what is in each one of those glasses, I think helps facilitate a healthier level and a healthier approach to the end consumption.
Yeah, I would agree, and I you know, I'll commend you, Francisco, because like, where was it? It was at the Violet Hour. You were with Mezcal Vago. It would have been 2017 or early 2018. You were doing a training with the team from Doves and Big Star, and like I remember sitting in on that and learning so much. And I learned so much I didn't even have to taste it. But when I did taste it, I was like, oh, I made these connections. And it wasn't just about like, oh, I get to drink mezcal all afternoon. And that shaped my teaching style, how I approached spirits education in general. And so I think that there's also responsibility, you know, what you're speaking to in when we provide education around drinks, which essentially we're providing education around poison, you know, like friendly reminder, it's poison, that we are modeling adequate and healthy and responsible education for the people who are going to come into educative roles moving forward, right? So there's also that responsibility there, and that you know, educating the educator and teaching and creating a lineage of responsibility. What else can we add? Because we're coming up on time, and I want to honor everybody's time. I could talk about this for days.
I feel like this is kind of like an ongoing question for me. Like I just launched the school about a month ago. And, you know, I was like, I want to do some things that are like, you know, for consumers who maybe haven't felt super welcome in the wine industry. Like one of my Wine 101 classes, the woman said that she went to a natural wine store and the person was like basically making fun of her for liking New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And so I want to, you know, give spaces for the person who likes New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc that was, you know, kind of pushed away. And
Whatever, I'll take
encouraged.
on Sauvignon Blanc all day. I don't care.
It is highly drinkable for a reason. It is. But like beyond that, you know, also creating some spaces that are like, you know, free spaces, more discussion oriented. Like I actually kicked off the school with a wine ethics discussion where I just there were probably, you know, 25 of us or so from the wine industry. And we just kind of talked about like ethical issues in the wine industry. So I think just creating spaces, first of all, for people to like share their experiences, to hear from other people, to start thinking themselves, like what are some actionable items, and kind of spreading the word. So like starting with yourself and people to come up with action items. And then also, I mean, going back to what Kelvin was saying about these academic spaces, I just think back to like, I did a ton of like queer and trans activism in college. And a big thing was we would, you know, constantly be thinking like, who's not in our room? Who are we not representing in this space? And I think that, you know, that could be really useful in the wine industry to be like, okay, look around this room today. Are we all white? Are we all, you know, is it all male, you know? And just taking a space to kind of say like, okay, well, these voices aren't being heard and why. Also creating some spaces like that. Like I'm doing an LGBTQ wine brunch for just like LGBTQ wine professionals or any in the wine industry who might be queer and trans to just get together, talk about it, you know, issues, things like that. So I think creating spaces that are not just like, I'm going to memorize these subregions of Bordeaux today, but, you know, talking about like, you know, how do we create spaces where like people feel welcome in the room, and, you know, what are we talking about and how are we talking about them?
I want to highlight the ethics piece, you know, and, you know, having an ethical framework and living within that framework and having your ethical framework be, you know, constantly evolving and plastic and changing as you learn, I think is really important. And bringing ethics into education is, you know, is very, very important. And it also sets a tone around education that transfers the responsibility from the educator also to the student. Calvin, do you want to add anything else?
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yo, you don't want to add, it's not a zero-sum game. You know, inclusivity of spaces, of bars, of brand representation, bringing in Black, queer, women, Indigenous. The more people that come into these spaces, the more people that make their way, whether they're allowed or they break through, much like myself, because I wasn't allowed. I had to white knuckle that shit until people saw the gangster. So I think what I want to say is that it's not a zero-sum game. Like the white gatekeepers and the capitalist gatekeepers and the misogynist gatekeepers of all colors and gender backgrounds have as much to gain in bringing exclusivity into these spaces as the people that are coming there, right? So we have, in doing so, the space will change. We talk about how do we facilitate a space? Like, we don't do that. It's the convergence of all these cultures in that space that morphs the space. Just because you bring people into a space doesn't necessarily mean the space will change, feel inclusive, feel safe, or feel like community. Mm-hmm. The other thing I want to say is that gatekeeping and holding on to information as a power dynamic is a male thing. That's a male fucking trait. It was used against women historically. It's used against brown and Black people historically. It's incredibly male. So I think the more women that we allow to take power in these situations, I think the transference of information will look really different. The more people that come in will morph the space, and it is not a zero-sum game for those who give a little bit. Power is not static. You don't just have it. It's transferred constantly. It's given, it's gotten, it's lost, it's received, and it looks different in every space.
You know, and you said something about, you know, the power piece of education. It makes me think about, and now I'm opening a bag of worms, but I guess I'll leave this for people to think about and ponder on their own about mentorship. Like, I remember when I started my degree for counseling, the first thing that we were assigned to read was an article written about how, as counselors, we are ethically obligated to work our way out of a job. It means to help people, get them to a point that they can continue to function on their own. And when we gatekeep knowledge, or we use mentorship as as a power play or a way to control other people, that's not mentorship, right? That's oppressive. You know, as mentors, as leaders, as educators, we want the students who are, you know, listening and taking in the information that we're sharing, to be able to flourish and thrive beyond us, right? And it doesn't mean that we don't grow, but, you know, education should be a doorway. You know, it should be a doorway. And remembering that when we are teaching, even though this is a business, you know, even though we want to sell boxes, even though we want to keep our positions, you know, finding that intersection for ourselves and what feels good and what feels ethical and what feels right. That's kind of our own path to find. So, y'all,
And
thank you.
leave that self-righteousness out the fucking door. Like when people come up all self-righteous, like you're saving the world with some shit, I'm like, yeah. Fuck out of here.
You
It's
know,
alcohol.
My bad, y'all.
It's just booze. We're just all selling. We're all just selling poison. No big deal. Yeah. Delicious poison. Says the therapist. All right, y'all. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Everyone who's tuning in. I don't remember what the next seminar is. Everything's fine. Oh, it's about how hospitality affects our personal well-being outside of work, how the patterns and behaviors that we learn within hospitality. Yeah, it's going to be a thing. And talk a whole bunch about, you know, helping ourselves, helping others, relationships, codependency, all of that stuff. It's going to be dope. Yeah, to the three of you, thank you so much for joining me and talking about this. And I hope this isn't the end of this conversation for us and for all y'all.
Nice to meet you, Miranda.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thanks everybody jumping in today.
Well, see you all later.
Thank you.
Peace.
Bye.